leadership. And again, the webinar will begin, and you see the time at the beginning. Can we go to the next slide, Pat? I'm the moderator. My name is Peter Ashenden. I'm the Director of Consumer Affairs for Optum Behavioral Health. And Rita, if I'm not mistaken, I think I've been the moderator for all 31 of these sessions. So it's good to do another one. Next slide, please. The webinar series is presented by members of the International Association of Peer Supporters with generous assistance from Optum, without whom the series would not be possible. INAPS is fully responsible for the content of the webinar, and we always thank you for your participation. Next slide, please. The certificates are an INAPS certificate. Additional instructions on how to obtain the certificate for attendance for 1 hour of continuing ed will be provided at the end of the program. Next slide, please. And at this point, I have the pleasure of introducing, I'm going to say a good friend. I hope she feels the same way. We have known each other now for, I was thinking about this last night. I think we've known each other about 20 years, back to my days at Mental Health Empowerment Project, Pat. And that's like,
oh yeah.
In fact, it may have even before Mental Health Empowerment Project. But I remember seeing you speak in Albany a few times, and I was absolutely amazed with your abilities, your skills, and how you're able to take and bring across very complex and important points and get them across to people so that they can understand and embrace them. Pat is a internationally known consumer researcher, has done cutting-edge work all of her life, and it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce her, and it's an honor and a pleasure to have her here with us today. Pat, take it away.
Sure. Thanks so much, Peter. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today, and I'm really looking forward to our topic today, which is practicing recovery leadership, which I think is just a really important role that those of us who are peer supporters play, so really looking forward to hearing from you and having this opportunity to be with you. I did want to, before I get started, ask you to consider joining me on social media. I have a active blog with a lot of great content. Two recent blogs you see here. One really kind of stirred up a really interesting conversation. Peer specialists are not clinicians, and if we're not junior clinicians, then what is? How do we understand the distinction between the clinical role and the peer role? So, and also recently, I did another blog on the roots of the lived experience and peer support, and I'm getting at this idea of like, so where did this phrase "lived experience" come from? And I give some background and some history on that. So that's the flavor or the type of thing that I do blog about, and I think it's of interest to anybody in a peer supporter role. So if you are interested, you can follow me through Facebook. We have a nice Facebook page up, and it's pretty active. Lots of great comments and feedback and resources popping up all the time. You can also check out the actual blog itself, which is at my website, patdeegan.com. You can follow my Twitter feed, which always links to stuff going on with the blog. And also, if you're in the mood, you can check out my recovery library. It's an online recovery library at recoverylibrary.com. And you can also email me directly at pat@patdeegan.com. People sometimes ask me, hey, what are you up to these days, Pat? And at this point, although I never set out to run my own business, I find myself in the midst of running my own business for the past 20 years or so after moving on from the National Empowerment Center. And so these days, I have a 8 associates working full-time with my company, and we do a lot of different things. All of it's geared towards supporting the recovery of our peers. Some of the premier stuff that we do is develop software that empowers our peers to speak up and have a voice and a choice in medication treatment. It's called Common Ground, and it is being used at over 70 sites and by almost 30,000 people around the country. We also produce the Recovery Library. We also offer academies for peers and for practitioners and for teams working with people who are experiencing first episode psychosis, for wellness nurses and health navigators. And it's all recovery-oriented practice. You know, how to get beyond the basic sort of principles of recovery and actually do recovery-oriented work in the real world, in the day-to-day world. So that is really what I've been up to in my work recently, and we invite you to join our Conspiracy of Hope. You know, I love that phrase, Conspiracy of Hope. I think that's what it's going to take, is a conspiracy of hope where we're all breathing that spirit of hope for recovery, wellness, and healing for the folks I work with. So that's a little bit about what I'm up to these days, and I'm also really looking forward to coming out to Arizona, which I think is just a magnificent state and an awesome place, and having an opportunity to give a keynote in a workshop at the N.A.P.S conference coming up real soon. So onward to our topic of the day, practicing recovery leadership. And as you can see from the image here, that's quite a crevasse there, and it is kind of tricky sometimes, kind of scary. It has its own dangers, practicing recovery leadership in the real world, and that's why I choose this image of these intrepid folks leading the way safely past on their journey. So when I say the word leadership, what is it that comes to mind? And I think that for most of us, this word leadership conjures up images of the world's great ones. So leaders like Harriet Tubman, or Gandhi, or Abraham Lincoln, or the great Winston Churchill, or, of course, Cesar Chavez. So now I'd like to ask you, if you were to build this slide in the chat, who would you include among the leaders that you think of when I say the word leadership? Who are the great leaders that you admire? Let's go ahead and pop your thoughts into the chat. Peter will help us see what you're...
I'll keep you posted as to what's coming into the chat.
Thank you.
We have one Martin Luther King. We have the Dalai Lama. We have another Martin Luther King.
Nice.
We have the Bill Wilson.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
Yeah, of course. Nicholas Tesla. Gandhi. Peter Early, Peter Action. Get out of here.
There you go.
Kai Nine. Nicholas Winton. The premises. Okay. Dalai Lama. Malcolm X. John Adams. Mother Teresa. Another Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Gloria Steinem. Maya Angelou. Kevin Hines. Tom Paine.
Beautiful.
All right, you got some pretty good leaders there.
I'd say so. So when you're looking at this slide now, what I want you to do is to superimpose on some of the leaders that I named, the ones that you have named, okay? And, I would guess that most of us are hesitant to imagine ourselves as people who are called to leadership like these great ones were and are. But I would argue that as peer supporters, we need to practice leadership as part of our work. So I'm putting this here. You're here. Imagine your picture here. Just like these great leaders, we, peer supporters, are out to change the world. And that's because for us, working in the mental health system is really not just a job. It truly is a calling. It's a mission. It's about making the world a much better place for our peers. And it's also about striving for social justice because we are, like it or not, members of a socially disenfranchised and socially devalued group. So beyond just supporting our peers in their recovery, in their journey of healing, and their journey to wellness, being a peer supporter is also about being an advocate and about being a champion for recovery. And I think being a peer supporter, especially if we're working in traditional mental health settings, it really is about putting our energy towards helping to transform mental health services so that the service system becomes kinder and more person-centered and more recovery-oriented. And frankly, all of this requires that we have the skills to practice leadership on an everyday basis. So I ask, what is a leader? Now, one of the ways that I approach this question is by thinking about leaders that I admire. And two of my heroes are Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King. And of course, when we see these leaders, we definitely tend to think of them as extremely special people, right? They're just incredibly special. Both of these folks are Nobel Peace Prize winners, and frankly, they changed the world. So how, we ask, can we ever become leaders like these great ones? But there's the rub for me. I think that putting great leaders on a pedestal is a trap. Because when we set these leaders apart from us and we put them up on a pedestal and we say, oh, they were saints, or oh, they had, been chosen by fate, they had very special destinies. In a way, when we do that, we're actually letting ourselves off the hook. When we say Mother Teresa or Reverend King had special talents or special powers or anything like that, I think what we're also implying is I can't possibly be expected to do that, to lead like they led. And so that's exactly why I've chosen to put these photos of them, because in these photos, they're young. These are photographs of leaders before they were saints, before they were public figures on the world stage. So here you see a young Mother Teresa on the streets of Calcutta, surrounded by a sea of misery, of the poorest of the poor. And she is, importantly to me, alone. She sees this sea of suffering humanity around her. And then, of course, there's the young Reverend King, and this is his mugshot. And he's in some jail in the Deep South, and he's not on television. And he's not leading a host of followers. And he's not alone. I mean, he is alone, in this jail. And he's surrounded by Lord knows what, probably police carrying heavy batons and guns. I mean, he's scared. She's scared. But they're not paralyzed. Both of them are really vulnerable, but they're strong. Look at those eyes. They are afraid, but they are unwavering. And so for me, that is part of what a leader is. Scared, but not paralyzed. Vulnerable, but strong. Afraid, but unwavering. And I think we throw around this word courage a lot. Well, they have courage. They're courageous. But think about that word courage. I believe that courage is an attribute that those of us on the outside would ascribe to another person. Because look at Reverend King right there, staring into the camera that's taking his mugshot in an Alabama jail, right? And I would bet you money that he's not feeling courage right now. What he's experiencing is a cold sweat. His hands may be shaking. His knees may feel weak. He may just want to run and get out, okay? And Mother Teresa, the eyes are intense, okay? And she's hanging on to that child, okay? But I bet she, too, is a bit weak in the knees, right? And her head is swimming with doubt and fear. How do I even begin? And yet she does. She lifted up the one child. So courage, I think, is a little bit of a tricky word. That a person that we ascribe, oh, they're courageous, oh, they had great courage, well, kind of no, they didn't. That's our viewpoint on the person, on the great leader. But their experience is that they are unwavering in the face of uncertainty. They are unwavering in the face of fear. They are unwavering even though they are vulnerable. And what this allows us to do is to relate, okay, to get them off that pedestal and to say, wait, I know that feeling, right? So my point is that even though these great ones experienced fear, vulnerability, and uncertainty, they remain unwavering, and these are things that I can relate to. They're just like me in that way. Teresa, exhausted, overwhelmed, just like I have been. Reverend King breaks into a cold sweat. His hands are trembling, and sometimes he just would rather go home. He'd rather forget about all of it. Eat a nice home-cooked meal, play with his children. I mean, sometimes you just want to walk away. And yet they persevered. They persevered. Why? Why didn't they just give up against overwhelming odds? And I'd put the question to you, why don't you and I just give up against the overwhelming challenge of transforming behavioral health systems to be kinder places where our peers can experience healing and true help? Why don't we just give up and against what sometimes feels like these overwhelming challenges of running peer programs as alternatives to traditional services when our budgets are the last to be funded and the first to be cut? Why do we go on? Now, the answer I come up with is that we go on because as leaders, we have a vision of what is possible, and it is a compelling, and it is a passionate vision that we have. One of my definitions for a leader is one who can look into the face of the world's suffering and see a new possibility where others would flee. A leader is one who can look straight into the face of it and see something new is possible. So for Reverend King, he looks into the face of the Jim Crow South and racial segregation and white supremacy, and he sees the possibility for a nonviolent revolution to bring about a world in which all people have civil rights and opportunity. So a leader is also one who strives to close the gap between what is and what should be. So Mother Teresa saw the gap between the poor and the rich, and instead of fainting at the magnitude of the gap, instead of collapsing in despair, she bursts forth in a kind of hope and has a vision of loving the poor one person at a time. So I ask you, have you ever looked into the face of the world's suffering and saw a new possibility? Have you ever looked at a person in physical restraints, or a person who is on so much medication that they keep nodding out all the time and they can't work? Have you ever thought, this is wrong, and then imagined a new way of helping people in emotional pain and distress? So, have you ever felt the gap between what is and what should be? Have you ever felt outrage at the stigma and discrimination and poverty that people with disabilities are forced to endure? Have you ever felt outraged that our peers are dying 25 years younger than non-diagnosed Americans? Have you ever dared dream of closing the gap between what is and what should be? Have you ever dared dream of a world that is more just for those of us who've been diagnosed? If so, then you have been called to leadership. So I have a quick exercise. In the chat, please name at least one of the gaps that you see. Or in the chat, you can use this simple formula to convey the gap you see. What I see is blank, and what should be is blank. I'm really interested. What do you see as the gap between what is and what should be?
We've gotten our first response. What I see is movement towards metrics. What should be is consumer-focused care. Very good point, Brandy. Thank you. Living and working off the grid. What I see is bias and lack of training in trauma, mental health knowledge. What should be is emphasis on trauma. What I see is stigma. What should be is compassion. What I see is defensiveness by caregivers. What should be, on a minute, boy, what this thing is. What should be is compassion.
What I see is prescribers giving orders. What should be is they listen more and help the participant together make a decision together for the participant's wellness and personal goals.
What I see is a lot of should be is action. I'm sorry. The chat room is going so fast. Rita, can you keep up with it?
Yep. I can't see all of it though, Peter. You're getting some in that I'm not seeing, so I think they're going directly to you in some cases. But I'll cover the ones I've got.
You need to use that everyone function at the very top of the chat box. So yeah, it should be off-grid urban housing. Seeing psychiatric people, seeing a disease and condition instead of people. I see a gap between clinical care and really good at this. Continuous support to encourage moving beyond stabilization.
I see a pain-centered conversation now, and in the future, a joy-centered. What should be is people reaching out to people. What should be is treatment knowledge and acceptance with contributing to trauma and bias. What I see a lot of talk should be is action that is holistic and person-centered. People getting better are afraid to say that they're having a hard time for fear of being rehospitalized and losing their new social role. Less demanding compliance and more compassion.
Disrespect to respect. I got to tell you, Pat, these are fantastic answers.
Well, I feel like we're writing a manifesto.
I do too.
I mean, this is so.
I'm trying to read the manifesto being written.
Right. It's just like, let's get this, keep it coming, guys, and let's get it copied and make sure everybody gets a copy of these comments. It truly is a leadership manifesto from the peer supporter community that we're just spontaneously writing, and so just arbitrarily keep it rolling, guys, as I continue the talk, so we don't run out of time. I believe, and you've got tears in my eyes now. Okay, guys, I'm deeply moved. You're spot on, and that's why I think that those of us in the room today, we have been called to leadership. These are a bunch of peer friends of mine out in Kansas, and we have felt the outrage at the gap between what is and what should be in the mental health system. And we, as peer supporters, we have not walked away. We have a vision of what's possible, and for many of us, it's a vision of engaging our peers with dignity, with compassion, with effective, evidence-based and trauma-informed treatment. It's about alternative paths to wellness and recovery. It's, of course, about peer support, kindness, and opportunities to heal. And when faced with this gap between what is and what should be, frankly, many people turn around and they walk away. They say it's overwhelming. They say, well, nothing can really change. And some people also fall into the trap of thinking they have no power to affect change, and that it's the psychiatrists and the policymakers and the politicians and the pharmaceutical companies that have all the power. But as leaders, we're different. And this is a key point. We understand that power is not a finite commodity. This is an important analysis that came out of the feminist leadership tradition, right? In feminism, we understand that power is not finite. Because once we think that there's only a limited amount of power, then it all becomes about a power struggle to steal power, take power, etc., right? But we can understand that power can be created when we come together. That's important. Power can be created among ourselves. We can generate power together, right? And so when faced with the gap between what is and what should be, we have a vision, and that vision includes creating, community and power coming up through that community. That we see possibilities as leaders where really others might only see the probability of failure. So a leader, by definition, leads because they know how to help others develop their leadership. So leadership is not about being a diva. Divahood really is a very impoverished idea of what being a leader means, right? Leadership is a practice, and it's really not a position. So a person can occupy a position of great authority, right? But still be an ineffective leader. So it's not a top-down thing. We can practice leadership from many different positions. So we can be the CEO of an organization, or we can be a newly certified peer supporter, and we can still practice leadership. Okay, so at this point, I'm feeling energized, a little weepy, feeling really pumped up right now because of the energy that I can feel, and I'm in touch with my outrage, and I'm experiencing the energy that goes with my vision and your vision, our manifesto, of closing this gap between what is and what should be. And I would put my money that perhaps you're feeling something close to that too as you listen to this talk so far. So then, all right, we show up at work and we have a mission and we're excited and we're passionate about what we do, and we're like, yes, peer support. And we know about the importance of voice and choice, yes. And the power of personal medicine, yes. Recovery, hope, healing, yes. Right? And wellness, and the importance of closing the gap, yes. Right? And then sometimes, rather than being met with enthusiasm by our coworkers, instead we're met with this. Meh. What is it? Right? What is this? And I think the word is that this is resistance. And resistance sounds like this. Oh, what a great idea, but there's no budget for that. We're downsizing. You can't bill for that. There's not enough staff. We have enough to do already. There's too much paperwork involved. Where's the scientific evidence, right? Well, visionary leadership, by definition, is often met with resistance. So a great, wise community organizer named Marshall Gantz, he's a renowned community organizer, helps us understand that resistance to visionary leadership is to be expected. By the way, Gantz, has a lot of good stuff on the internet. I really encourage you to check him out. And he went to work for President Obama or candidate Obama's campaign, and helped to organize at the local level all across the United States, and help people discover themselves as leaders in their local community, and take on the resistance, which was mighty, for candidate Obama. So check out Marshall Gantz when you do get a chance. But in any case, Gantz instructs us that there are 5 forms of resistance that we are bound to encounter when we bring our visionary leadership, when we are energized to help transform the places where we work. The first form of resistance that we may encounter is inertia. And inertia is when our organization or our coworkers get mired down in a habit, and the cultural norm within the organization, or as Marshall Gantz would call it, a disorganization, is to ignore the signs that action's needed. And inertia basically sounds like, hey, that's just the way we do things here. Would you please get on board with the program? Don't come on in here with all these ideas. Just get on board with the way we do things here. The second type of resistance to recovery leadership is fear. So when faced with this gap between what is and what should be, our coworkers might become afraid. And they might become afraid of failing at change, or they may fear getting fired if they try something new, losing their job at the agency, being laughed at, losing faith. I mean, the fear paralyzes people. And fear is how we often rationalize inaction. A third form of resistance is apathy. So this one I find really difficult. It's the meh thing, right? So we may, as leaders, be moving into action, and we encounter this kind of deadening apathy by coworkers, by leadership. It's a pervasive form of passivity. And Apathy is like, well, there's nothing I can do about this. I remember coming into a job one time, and I was full of vision and passion and energy about doing things differently. And I remember meeting a state worker who just looked at me, and he said, look, I've seen people like you come and go, like a dime a dozen, Tad. And he said, the way I play it is I'm in it for retirement. I got 2.x number of years to go, and I just play it like a piece of driftwood floating over the next wave, and all you are is the next wave. Whoa, that's pretty profound apathy, right? The fourth form of resistance that we encounter is self-doubt. And self-doubt, of course, works among our coworkers. Me, you expect me to do that? I can't do that. I'm not qualified. People like me can't take on change at work. Yeah, I believe in recovery, but really, I can't make it happen on my team or in my organization. I'm just a case manager. You can't expect me to do anything. And then finally, isolation. And so people get isolated. They silo the change. Hey, you're a young, energetic peer supporter. I'll keep you in the recovery silo. I'm just going to go about business as usual, right? So what Marshall Gantz suggests is that there are specific things we can do to begin to counter these forms of resistance to visionary leadership. And so the first is when we encounter inertia, when we encounter it, we need to counter it with urgency. And so urgency is less about time and more about a kind of a commitment and concentration of energy. So we summon our energy and we remind coworkers that change is needed now, not 5 years from now. When we encounter fear in our colleagues or our coworkers or on a team, we counter it with our hope. We find the will to act, even though it may be scary to act. And I really like this phrase that hope encourages us, meaning hope helps us find that trembling courage, right? Hope means keeping our eyes on the prize. It's like a compass. Hope is like a compass that keeps us on course despite fear. When we encounter apathy, we counter it as leaders by summoning our outrage. Now, this is an important word. I'm not saying go around raging at our coworkers. It's a great way to get fired, right? That's not what I'm saying. Outrage is that feeling that arises in us when we see that gap between what is and what should be. And when we speak from that place, we speak with an urgency, we speak with hope, and we speak with outrage. This should not be. This is what should be. And then when we encounter self-doubt, our job is to say, hey, really, you can make a difference. And together we can transform our work and our organization to move away from disorganization to truly being organized around what matters. And then finally, we can break through isolation by creating solidarity, not just with other peer staff, but sometimes we can find fantastic allies who can be in real solidarity and who also have a vision about what should be that can both energize and our own vision. So then I ask you then, why do you do this work? What has called you personally to this work, and why are you here? Why are you working as a peer supporter? In case no one told you, there certainly are a lot easier ways to make a living. And so I think one of the most profound questions we can ask our colleagues is, why did you come to work today? Because there are a whole lot easier ways to make a paycheck. So if you can answer these questions, then you have a leadership story. And a leadership story is like try to hear this. Having a leadership story is like having a well of life-giving energy, life-giving water with you all the time, close to your heart. A leadership story is really your unique story of why. Why do you do what you do? Why do you show up at work at jobs that are really hard to do? Why? Why do you remain hopeful despite the sometimes overwhelming odds? Your leadership story is your hope keeper. It is your compass. And when you and I doubt our purpose, when we're encountering that inertia, that fear, that apathy, turn to our leadership story. That's the why. That's the purpose for doing this work. It's the root of where our capacity to lead comes from. And our leadership story, when we live it, when we can speak it, it actually emboldens others to act. Because stories, like a leadership story, they reach past the head and into the heart. And into the heart. And all leaders have a leadership story. So Reverend King told us his leadership story. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And Reverend King's leadership story bypasses the head and went straight to the heart of millions of people around the world. It was a one-sentence story that he honed and honed again over many, many years, right? And his leadership story captures that gap between what is and what should be, and it simultaneously declares his hope and his dream and his vision for all to see. And notice how Reverend King's leadership story is both personal and it's universal. And that's what makes for a good leadership story. A good leadership story always sounds very personal, but also has universal themes that pluck the chord of justice in the hearts of those who are listening. And now I'm going to do something audacious. After a slide with our beloved Reverend King, I'm going to put up a slide with my picture. Because I meant it. When I showed the picture of Harriet Tubman and Abraham and the rest of them, you are here. Well, Pat Deegan's there too. Okay? And this isn't an act of hubris. It's an act of leadership, right? And I want to share with you my leadership story. And it's not honed or as perfected as Reverend King's is, but it's the story I've got right now. So my leadership story, and I share this leadership story, and in fact I have done nothing but share my leadership story for the last 30 years in one form or another, right? My leadership story. When I was a teenager, a psychiatrist in a mental hospital said I was a schizophrenic. He said my life was over and to go home, take high-dose antipsychotics, and avoid stress for the rest of my life. I remember an ember of what was left of my dignity ignite within me. I stepped out of his office, and a new thought came to me. You're wrong about me. I am going to become Dr. Deegan and change the mental health system so no one ever gets hurt in it again. True story. True story. And in one form or another, I've been telling that leadership story for 30 years. And so I ask you, what is your story, right? What's your dream? What are the universal themes of your story that others are going to be able to relate to, right? How can you tell your leadership story in a few sentences the way Dr. King told his? So in order to discover your leadership story, there are 5 things we need to work on. 1, what calls you to this work? 2, describe your outrage. 3, how should things be? What are the universal themes of your story that most will identify with? And 5, how will you call others to join you? Okay? And I've developed my call to leadership worksheet that's available in the chat, the URI to be able to download it, which will walk you through these steps to be able to begin to hone and to articulate your call to leadership. Now, I need to say that I have worked with organizations, both peer organizations, psychiatric clinic services, with a bunch of psychiatrists and nurses. I've done it with entire organizations, and helping people develop their call to leadership. To answer the question, why did you come to work this morning, is probably one of the most transformative and awe-inspiring exercises we could do with coworkers to transform the culture of an organization, right? Because we work side by side with people, sometimes for years on end, and never know why they come to work every day. Because like I say, there are way easier ways to make a living than working in public sector mental health. It just is. A lot more money and a lot less hassle. Right? People show up, and I don't care if you're a nurse, psychiatrist, a therapist, a case man, people show up for a reason. Each one of us has this ember, this vision. It's hidden most of the time. People are afraid to reveal it because it makes us vulnerable. Okay? But we come, and we come carrying a light that we want to pass on. And I don't care if you're a psychiatrist, you come too. And there's a reason, right? And when staff, when coworkers have the audacity to begin to share with each other the reason they came to work today, wow, things start shaking. And it's a very, very powerful, transformative leadership exercise. So, in the end, what I want to say is that together we lead. Together we're going to overcome this resistance and this organizational inertia and close this gap between what is and what should be. So, I think we've got a few minutes left, and hopefully I get to hear a little bit from you. Questions, thoughts?
Pat, I want to take and thank you very, very much for an absolutely inspiring presentation. The chat box is so full of trying to take and keep getting it over to a Word document so we have it all. So, but it's been absolutely amazing. Thank you for a fine presentation. And audience, this is our opportunity to take and ask Pat questions. Please take and put them into your chat box, making sure that you have everyone selected on the chat box. And those questions that we don't get to, we will try to take an answer on the website at I.N.A.P.S. So go back to the website at I.N.A.P.S. whenever you can. So, Rita, would you help me with the questions while I try to copy what's been taken down, what's been written down so far?
Sure. We've gotten a couple of thank you. Thank you for this presentation. I've waited a long time to hear her live. Yes, very inspirational. I was going to Phoenix, but can't. Oh, too bad. Thank you very much. Yes, please, we'd love a copy of the slides. What we do with the slides is we put them in conjunction with our certificate, which goes to members only. That's when the webinar is recorded. The recording is accessible through our website, and that's free for anybody to view. In order to get a certificate of participation, we ask that you send an email to members at NAOPS.org, just requesting the quiz for the webinar, and then we will send a certificate and the slides in conjunction with that.
Pat, I have a question for you. The question is, what do you do when you feel discouraged? Is it just getting in touch with your leadership story, or is it something else?
When I'm feeling discouraged?
Discouraged.
Yeah. So what I do
is... time to time.
Oh, my gosh. I can't tell you how often. You know? Because the odds are formidable. The odds, it's a David and Goliath thing, kind of, you know? But we know who... Anyway, what do I do? What I do is I'm careful to share my discouragement with a peer, with someone I love, someone who can support me, and who can and hear me. Just let me say it out loud, because it's real. You know, discourage. You know, there's that word courage again, right? Versus encourage. I'm not looking for encouragement. I just want validation. Yes, that was hard. Yes, this seems overwhelming. This is going to be hard. The next thing I often do is I go for a long walk in nature, because I have trouble sitting still for long periods, and I like walking, and it just connects me with the planet, with the goodness of the world around me. That there might be this group. I remember not long ago being challenged by a group of psychiatrists who were using my Common Ground software to come in and tell them why it was important, and I was terrified. I went for a long walk in nature. Talk to someone who can support me. Get grounded again in the fact that the world is truly a blessed, good place, and that just helps me get grounded. And then I do reach for my vision, for my hope. I call it a hope keeper, my leadership story. And you know, I just, the only way I can put it is there's a fire in my soul, and there, like Martin Luther King talked about, it's a fire that you can aim the hoses at it, and it ain't going out. It may flicker. You know, some days it's stronger than others, but by gosh, it's there when I need it. And it has to do with just fundamental human dignity. You know, I love the term angry indignation, because at the heart of that word indignation is the word dignity. And my dignity got deeply battered, okay, in the early phases of psychiatric care, right? And I've never forgotten. I can't forget. And I know it still goes on. And my mission is to change this mental health system so no one ever gets hurt in it again. And when I go there, I feel the power rise up in me again. It's a fire that won't go out. And I know you guys have that fire. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing. And draw on it. It's your hope keeper. And it's what you ultimately draw on in the face of overwhelming odds and discouragement.
Well, Pat, I think that we've run the full gamut on this. I want to tell you, you have been absolutely inspiring, and the comments in the chat box are just over the top with how much people have appreciated what you shared, what you've offered to everyone. But Pat, I can't thank you enough. I think this is definitely letting us all know of some of the special information we'll receive when we're at the conference and listening to Pat do a keynote. So I'm very pleased that Pat was able to come by. I know her work. I've been following her work for years. She's absolutely amazing. And I think we all need to thank her for bringing her skills, her knowledge, her abilities, and her reason to us so that we can take and incorporate some of those principles into our lives. So Pat,
thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, you have a good day, everybody.
All right.
Thank you, Patty.